But this is saying that only when we are swept into activity through the creative process do we become possessed of a soul. So that's very interesting. Okay, so now that we've done a look at that little chart, that's kind of a precursor of the Make It Make Sense version before we go into, let's pull up the publisher's website and look at Bailey's language for how we understand all of this. And going back to our text here, so we're recognizing that first ring pass knot that it's saying. This is difficult for people to grasp beneath the rank of initiate or accepted disciple of the higher stages. And when Bailey says that, what does that mean? So this is interesting. I just looked up, what is discipleship on regular search. So this is telling us that discipleship is a journey of intentional decisions leading to maturity in your relationship with Jesus. This is from a Christian faith, website here, but it's really helpful in kind of clarifying how we're mirroring this. So it is a journey of intentional decisions leading to maturity in your relationship with Jesus, aiming to become more like him in attitudes, focus, and behavior. So discipleship is a decision to become more like who you are walking the path of in attitudes, focus, and behavior. It involves walking together in the way of Christ, learning to follow Jesus, and becoming his disciple by walking alongside someone further in the Christian faith. And this is very similar to having of a guru or a leader in some of the Eastern philosophy as well. When you take on accepted discipleship, you're usually walking alongside under the tutelage of someone who is further along in that faith practice. Then moving into another definition that's actually more specific from Bailey. So I just asked my little handy co-pilot about discipleship from Alice Bailey, and her teachings are emphasizing the importance of group work and collective consciousness. So again, that rise in consciousness up to soul dominance is an awareness of not just the individuated personality self, like, hey, we've got a larger mission that's affecting the whole, and in order to make bigger strides, we need to do group work and work on the collective consciousness, meaning more people rising in consciousness, and then by having that energy spread across the planet and making the world move into those ages that we go through, those cycles of ages of awakening when we are called upon to do so. Also, one of the things that I wanted to mention here is with the New Age and a lot of the kind of usurping of that whole phenomenon in the spiritual community, the traps and tricks are there. Like I said, and down here, I think I saw one thing where it mentioned about Bailey's discipleship. It said Bailey also describes, here's where I was going to give a caution, the role of meditation and the invocation of spiritual energies as key practices for discipleship. These methods are designed to help individuals connect with their higher selves and contribute to the greater good. This is where it's like, okay, pause, take a minute before you're over here invoking any kind of energies to come into you to help you with your practice, because in this spiritual journey of, development, you're not getting necessarily the guru or the Christian brother who is leading you into the faith. But even in those things, we have the stories that we hear of those religious people where there's religious leaders that do sin and commit egregious acts on their disciples and harm them. The idea is, do not be a sheep. Where am I? For this, I want to be on the screen. Do not allow yourself to be a sheep. That's not what this is about. Consciousness involves awakening the intuition, the spirit of discernment, discerning exactly certain qualities, and recognizing that the qualities of a righteous being or a divine being are not going to cause harm. They're not going to be coming from a place of selfishness, that are coming from only the lower desire nature. So it's not going to be about sex worship, and it's not going to be, sexual abuse and those kinds of issues that we see in different religious groups that are kind of like hush hush. But our role in it as a disciple is to choose to walk that path, is to choose who we're following. And if that person is not embodying, the way of the Buddha or the way of Christ the Messiah that came before you in terms of their behaviors, their actions, their deeds, living righteously and doing those things, not trying to usurp power, not trying to dominate over, or not trying to, commit crimes on someone, you have to take a role in assessing the actions of the person. Use your discernment, follow that intuition, that gut instinct. If you feel like something is wrong, same way with Bailey and these teachings. If it started to tell you to do an invocation and call in a spirit, you need to say, hey, pause. Am I ready for that? Do I know what I'm doing? Because this is not for play. 7 Bowmer talks about this a long time. Like, these beings are actual, and that stuff is real too. So this is never going to be a matter of sheepishness. We do not sacrifice ourselves as lambs to the ultimate knowing of another. We're here to choose the path that we walk. And that's why, again, it's like that buffet. What do I want more of? If I just ate all this stuff and I'm starting to get like the results that I don't want, or someone harms me, or if I don't like where teaching takes me, I could say, oh, I'm trying to take that off of my plate. Well, no thanks. I don't want that. So it doesn't have to be as, again, scary or intimidating as some people like to make it. And it also doesn't need to be as strict and rigid as other people like to make it on either side of the spectrum, religious or spiritual. It's about a walk that you were taking because you were choosing to emulate certain behaviors, actions, and attitudes, focus, different attitudes, focus, and behaviors. And it should be emulating someone whose walk is one that you do want to follow. So again, if ever on the spiritual path or the religious path, there is a version of that walk that does not sit well with you, you have a right to question it, to step away from it. Again, they live, clip. Do not question authority. That's what they're going to say. But this is your awakening journey, your consciousness. And so that's kind of how I go about it. But again, this isn't the sheep's journey. This is a very conscious, intentional practice. And the last thing that Bailey says in that first line is about initiates, right? So the initiations that Bailey talks about, it goes down to this journey of the constitution of man, where we're going from our lower nature up to the monad, which is the pure spirit, Father in heaven, kind of that all mind, the Godhead, right? And that journey is in a chart that I've shown a lot in the past. Here is the constitution of man from these works. It's basically just, these are the 7 planes. Where did it go? Over here. The 7 planes of existence. And you're starting down here with the physical plane, mastery over what is dense. All these different physical things, our body form. This is the kind of empty, unconscious nature, right? If you're just a rock, we have our emotions. We have to master those, right? When we master our emotions and our lower thoughts that are kind of like picking at us all the time, the ego that is like the self-absorbed ego, that is not the self with a capital S, because it's okay to be self-absorbed with a capital S, right? Because that's going to move us into higher consciousness. But the trick is, they tell you, don't be self-absorbed, don't be selfish. But it's because in our lower nature, all of that causes harm. All of that causes dis-ease and discomfort. So we master these first 3 planes, physical, emotional, mental, and you have this step, this small jump that we talk about, this leap from the highest level of our mental capacity is where we are awakened in the top of the head. The light in the head is our divine ego, that spark that connects us to these higher planes, where, again, in Bailey's teaching, she's saying that it's difficult for someone to grasp who's beneath the rank of initiate or accepted disciple of the higher stages. And that would be because you go up these levels. If you're still over here struggling to find what you're going to eat, where you're going to sleep, if you're still over here focusing on how to get your emotions, your ego stroked by, what you're out picturing in terms of the people you're dating, all that stuff, your mind is not going to be focused on these things in terms of grasping this information, right? So that makes sense. You need to be at a higher rank on these stages of development. Another thing I'll do really quickly is show this another picture that I liked from the slideshow that they do in the study of these teachings is this chart that shows the soul versus the personality. And I think this is also saying from that previous chart that we saw, this is actually more so in terms of the lower level of consciousness before the personality has been actually mastered. So this is still the lower level. You would say this is the lower stages of the spiritual path and to the higher stages where the focus is going to be more on the material, right? Just because when we're focused more with the constitution of man and the different planes of existence that we need to master to get to our divinity, if we're still down here in Maslow's pyramid focusing on what we're going to eat, how we're going to survive, then we're going to be focused on the material, right? More than the spiritual. Once you get your lower level in order, your lower level needs met, mastering what you need to do, and that takes responsibility, that takes discipline, right? That takes effort to get up every day, to devote yourself to a certain vocation, to show up well, to do a good job, to earn your income, to strive for more, to create, whatever you're going to create as your surroundings, to create an environment where you can go on the spiritual path, or you can create space for yourself to move into this direction. But before that, your ring past that is you're going to be focused on results. Like, right, how am I going to get this raise? How am I going to get more money? The spiritual path is going to be focused on causes of things. And so it's just kind of like a different sphere of thought. It's not to say that someone can't be in both places at the same time, right? But ultimately the goal is that when we are evolving in consciousness, we're going to focus more on ourselves as the actor, acting out a more orchestrated plan. We know our birth chart. We know what we're good at. So when we go for a job, we're going to go for a job that is in alignment with our skill set, which is in alignment with our personality, because we are a master of that. We know what that is. We're not just going to be looking at the next person and seeing that the result they have is a Maserati or a Lambo, and we want that Maserati or Lambo. So we're going to go and we're going to stalk that person and see where they live, where they shop, and then just do everything they do and expect to get those results. That's a lower consciousness framework of looking at things. We're going to look at it from the different causes. What caused that person to get those results? Well, they're probably moving in a certain way that's in alignment with their specific path. Or they have a certain set of circumstances that were set up to orchestrate that outcome. And we move more intentionally that way. So as I'm this actor on this world stage, what things do I need to do to cause the effects that I want? And that's how I move, very intentionally. People who are in lower consciousness states are focused on the mask that they wear, who they need to be in order to get what they need, what they want from a certain person. Again, the spiritual person is focused on their avatar, that they know that the actor that they're here to play, regardless of who they're interacting with, is going to be this person who is reflecting these traits that make my life move more easily. I'm not wearing a mask to kind of try and play and trick and get by. People that are on this personality, even if you're on the path towards moving into this, we can get stuck here. Like I said, that's that duality state where we're kind of in between. We're also going to be focused on expression, how we express ourselves. Can I show up in this group as my spiritual self? Am I going to be, laughed, mocked, or whatever if I show up in my yellow glasses? Probably. So how am I going to keep myself safe? I'm going to be thinking about this in these two worlds until I stand in, until I'm in a place where I'm just like, screw you, I'm freaking in my godhood. I'm going to rock my yellow glasses like Maxwell or Lenny Kravitz, because I have the money in the bank account to do that. And who's going to question me? They're just going to think it's a fashion statement. They're not going to know that I'm neurodivergent, and this helps me stay calm and centered and in a good circadian rhythm and a cycle that helps me sleep soundly and peacefully and keeps my mind at ease. I don't even have to tell them that. They'll make their assumptions because they're living based on masks, expressions, and exclusiveness. I don't like those lenses. Those aren't in style. That person doesn't have my label, so they can't sit at my table. Ooh, you've offended me in my label, so I'm going to become exclusive. I'm not going to identify with that person. I don't like spiritual people. I'm a sciencey person. There's no place for us to coalesce. The spiritual person is inclusive. They understand the higher design, and they know that we need all kinds of people, all kinds of thinkers in the great work. We have selfishness versus altruism, and lastly, self-consciousness versus group consciousness. So that one's always really good and fun to look at. Going back to our Bailey chart, I think actually I was looking at, okay, here we are. So that's where we're talking about in terms of mastery of these lower level natures. And now when you get your mind right to that place where you're just like, I'm focused on the things on the left-hand side of that diagram. When your mind is ready for these things, you will have all of those other things in order. And at that point, you have access to the higher level mind, which is part of this spiritual triad, where you master the intuition, you master the spiritual will, which is a part of mastery of spiritual plane energy that gets you in touch with that top three, which is, again, our monad, the monadic journey. So the monadic self identifies as these three things that we've been seeing over and over again in so many ways, right? Our 7 rays chart that we look at, first, second, and third ray, the father, the mother, the son. The father represents spirit or will. The mother represents matter or intelligent activity. And the son represents love, wisdom. Another way that we look at this information, or have looked at this information in the past, is the will, the feeling, and the thought. These are energies, right? These are expressions, but they also mirror different ways that we live our life. You and I were both born of a father and a mother, and that son or that child that comes from the joining of those two energies is another energy that is swept into activity in a certain way that creates all that is in existence. And so this process of creating is these first 3 rays, which again, we've talked about many, many times, are the rays of aspect that are the building blocks of everything that we see. And then they go further down into these other rays of attribute. But we're focusing here on these first 3 again, because this trinity continues to come up in terms of what we are reading here. Initiation. The monad reflects itself as these 3 aspects. The Godhead, the ultimate expression of divinity. The top of that constellation of man with the top triangle is the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. And that is the creative life force, or the energy that it says is only contacted at the final initiations when man is nearing the end of his journey. And this is not the journey of life. It's not something that you have to have before you die. It's the journey of the monad, the monadic journey Bailey talks about, which is that path of, I'm going to go into the path of spiritual awakening through whatever that may be, whatever religious sect or whichever spiritual sect gives me the tools and the set of actions and focuses for my mind and the way that I'm going to live to get my pyramid in order, my Maslow's pyramid, so I can feel fulfilled in my personhood, my immediate environment, so I can feel fulfilled in my confidence level of who I am as a person, what I'm meant to do, in order to have an easier time for my personality, and then higher than that, right? That's just the lower level of self, which this says here in the Constitution of Man. The ego is the personality or lower self that is made up of just our physical body, our emotions, and our mental, like we saw on that chart. Then when we are in touch with our ego, our spiritual ego, we can learn about our intuition, our higher mind, thinking on higher things, like these teachings, and our spiritual will. So it's like, okay, now I'm ready to create. I'm ready to create my experience. How do I do that? I'm learning that godhood energy, which is the highest step of higher self initiation, if you will, when you are expressing that creative activity where you've got mastery over all of your lower nature, and then and you're kind of moving through life from that kind of seat. All of that to say that is why Bailey has said here that we have a ring pass knot in terms of grasping this information typically. But you're not going to have that difficulty, because I just went through all of that to say this is why in the past, when this was written in the 1950s or whatever, or I always do this. Shoot, let me be right back. It was 1936. But that all to say, this was determined difficult for the average person to grasp at that time, at that stage. We're moving along our own trajectory. We now have different things that are aiding us, like technology, the ability to use AI to drill down information. Our books have been passed down. We're able to read and incorporate the knowledge from our education system and having information passed down to us through our parents, different things that help us with our learning curve be faster. So this, again, when you read a text like this, don't just automatically say, okay, I'm on the other side of this. I can't do this. I can't grasp this because I am not XYZ. for all those reasons that we learned. That's why it was said, because usually you'd have to get to that level of mastery to do it. By the end of reading this, we're going to see if necessarily you do grasp it, of course, but my aim is to kind of just make it seem a little bit less macro in terms of these concepts are not as out of reach as they might have been in the past, because a lot of ground has been laid by other people who've come before us in a way that is really helpful if you are interested in moving along the path of discipleship quicker. And Bailey actually says that in some of her other teachings too, because she knows that the time that we're in is different, or there's different souls incarnating at different times because of different people that are, like the movie They Live in that clip with that robot, the alien person or whatever, his energy of what their endeavors have been. It's essentially the soulless people. So that's what we're going to get into next. So what does that mean? Moving on. The soul is, here's what she was saying is hard to grasp. The soul is, what is the soul? It's a factor in matter, or rather that which emerges out of the contact between spirit and matter. Like I was just saying, we all came from the contact between spirit and matter, father, mother, where that energy of the soul is birthed forth, which produces sentient response. The response of that union creates consciousness, what we call consciousness, in its varying forms. A person can be highly conscious or awake, or highly asleep. And we're not talking about woke. That's very different. That's also been, usurped in its different ways. But the soul is a factor in matter which produces sentient response and what we call consciousness in its varying forms. It is also that latent or subjective essential quality which makes itself felt as light or luminous radiation. This is just, again, going deeper into what we covered in the last video. The soul is sentiency, consciousness, or radiation. But where it goes further is in this next part where it says, it is the self shining from within, which is characteristic of all forms. Matter, per se, in its undifferentiated state, prior to being swept into activity through the creative process. And that's why I showed that earlier chart about how the top of those charts, going through those first three rays of aspect, the Father, the Son, and the Mother, are the divine expressions that represent the creative process, right? That's how people are born. Creation. That's how you can keep it in your mind in its simplest terms, the creative process. And that, in broken down to the micro of each person, is that we each have our own will, we each have our own thoughts, and we each have our own feelings. And when we get those to work in harmony towards a thing, we know how to move like the Creator does in our creative process. We know how to create our own experiences in our life. That's part of the initiation process, is getting mastery of ourself, our lower nature, mastery over our thoughts, mastery over our feelings, mastery over our will, and how we exert that desire. And that's why he's saying that that's when we are sweeping into activity our matter. Matter is form, our bodies. So again, like that chart of consciousness, when a person is asleep and they're just on that selfish desire nature, they're not swept into activity yet. They aren't on that path of discipleship yet. But what this says is when we are swept into activity, we become possessed by the soul. Until that time, a person is not possessed of soul. Interesting, this possession word too, because that's what you see in movies. It's like, oh, that person is possessed. Some spirit is inside of them, right? Something other than them is inside of them. Similarly, when we are on the lower stage of evolution, when we haven't awakened, when we aren't conscious, when we, say, go through and drink heavily and do lots of drugs, we too become possessed, right, with the different spirits and the different energies that we take on when we're like loose sexually. And you take on the energy of all the people that person is sleeping with spiritually. You're not aware of that. So we're being possessed constantly by things that are not ourself, because we aren't moving up that stage of consciousness. That person is not possessed of a soul. That's what this is saying. That's what that means. You do not possess a soul automatically to be in possession of something. Possession is 9/10 of the law, they always say, right? So what does that mean? If there's a house on the street and you're not living in it, are you in possession of that house? You own it maybe, It's there for you to occupy, but you aren't inside of it physically. So if a wandering bum, I don't know if this law still applies, but they used to say this, if a wandering person, I'm sorry not to say bum, if some person wanders into your home and gets access and they happen to be living in that and dwelling and they built their family and they've, been there for all that time, the law used to say that possession is 9/10, almost 10 out of 10, almost 100% of the law, which means that if those people have been in possession of the home, they have been working the land, because that's usually what the house and the property used to be, right? You're on that land, you're tilling it, you're farming, you're working that service, so you're in possession of it, so that's 9/10 of the law. It goes to that person. You can't go over here from, Albuquerque and then come over here and say, hey, this plot of land in Costa Rica is my home, that's my house. You haven't been in possession of it. So just like they say the house is a body, is a house, is a temple, right? In Christian base, our temple, the temple of Christ. We have to be inside of that consciously. We, who is that we? That's the self. That is our personality, our spark. That is not being unclean in those other three lower level ways that we said. And that's why the Christian path or those religious paths talk about purity in terms of, alcohol, drugs, sex, different practices, the way we eat, all those things, eating certain foods, Judaism and all that stuff. We're like, we can't have pork, we have all these things. That's why these different practices have these rules in place for that lower nature, preparing the body for possession of the higher conscious self, so that we can walk that walk of righteousness or discipleship as the ones who before us did. The gurus, the Buddhist monks on that vegetarian or vegan diet, cleansing their body, cleansing their mind, abstaining from technology, whatever it is that walk dictates. The disciple on the path accepts that walk. A spiritual person might say, I don't need to be without technology and I don't need to be without sex, but maybe I'll just have, because then you have nuns, right? In the Catholic faith, they abstain from sex entirely. So again, I was like saying, choose your buffet, choose your path. But when you accept that path of discipleship, you accept those levels of rules that it dictates. And then you get ready to take possession of your house. You're about to learn who you are. But if we skip the step, that's why spirituality in this path of Bailey says that before you go into just walking the walk of emulating this person, you need to know yourself, the individuated self first. Your path, your lane, your gifts, your personality, and get into that seat first. And then you advance directly into contact and rapport with the soul, because we're moving through processes of sweeping into activity or lighting our fire, creating light, radiation, that emits a signal that attracts something back to it. So it's almost like sending out a signal or a beam that says, hey, I'm ready. And then having that energy come into you. This is where the trick of Bailey saying that that's what we're supposed to do. But you're not just calling anybody in there. Anybody out there who wants to come? That's like what seances happen with those old school, like, what do you call them? I can't think of the word right now. Those women who lead those psychics and the seances, and just call up on the spirit of someone who doesn't. You're just calling anybody, and then watch the movie Ghost with Whoopi Goldberg, because you just see that there's a room full of people behind her, and they're just like waiting for their turn. They're like, no, I want to jump in.
Oda May, listen, I got to talk to you now. I've got a plan. You see, I figured this thing out. There's something we can do. All we got to do, we can. Oda May. Oda May.
Tisha?
Orlando, is that you?
Tisha, where you at? I can't hardly see.
Here, she's here. In front of you, I'm right here.
Damn, baby, what you do to your hair?
Orlando, you like it? It's autumn sunrise. Get out of me, you son of a bitch! Don't you ever do that to me again, Orlando? Ugh.
So that's, you gotta be careful. You gotta be very specific who you're calling in. But with the path of discipleship of a religious faith, they usually have you walk with someone who's, again, on the path before you, that can lead you into how you do these practices and integrate that religious faith and that religious walk. spiritual. You're on more of a self journey, but you still have these texts. You still have these, you can watch videos and find someone, but that's how we get into that gurudom of you like pick someone like Teal Swan and then you're like, oh, going where you go. But I mean, to each his own. That's why there's so many different things to eat in the buffet. You find what you like and you walk that path and you continue to use your discernment and your intuition to assess where you are. If you like it, if you don't like it, more of that please, or no, I'm going to move this way, and that's fine. But this is saying that only when we are swept into activity through the creative process do we become possessed of a soul. So that's very interesting. Now it makes a lot more sense when you see people walking around and you see how they're behaving and how they're acting, and that's why, because the soul, what does that mean? The soul is their level of consciousness, their level of sentiency, awareness, cause and effect. Like when you're like, why does that person keep doing these things that keep allowing them to get hurt? Why do they keep going through these cycles? Why are they doing all this stuff? They're not conscious. They're on the lower level of the path where they move from selfishness, harm, and instability. That's where they are. They're not embodying their soul or their personality first. Moving on. Matter per se in its undifferentiated state prior to being swept into activity through the creative process is not possessed of soul and does not therefore possess the qualities of response and of radiation. That's the first and the third aspect here. Only when, in the creative and evolutionary process, these two are brought into conjunction and fusion, does the soul appear and give to these two aspects of divinity the opportunity to manifest as a trinity and the chance to demonstrate sentient activity and magnetic radiatory light. So basically, only then do you get to walk around as a person with a soul. You've got to embark on the path of, I'm going to be not selfish. I'm going to be stable. I'm going to learn how to get stable in my emotions, my thoughts, and I'm going to become more of myself, not more of who I see, and I'm not emulating everybody else. I'm going to become more conscious of self, knowledge of self. That's stepping onto the path. Whichever way you choose to do that, could be religious, could be spiritual, but that's when you become closer to moving into soul awareness, soul awakening, right? I'm going to take possession of my house. I'm going to take possession of my body. I'm going to take possession of my path, my spiritual path. I want to live as a soul in a body, having a human experience, whereas before I was living as a body, having a human experience, unaware of the fact that I have a specific personality and set of traits that make me shine as I am meant to, radiate, shine, my light. Light is wisdom, intuition, and information, conscious information. And I have a soul, a unique soul's journey that is based on all the higher spiritual knowledge and teachings that people are like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. That's too much. When you're unawakened. The first point that the Tibetans sought to make is that this is difficult to grasp for those beneath the rank of initiate or accepted disciple of the higher stages. Meaning before you've taken those steps to prepare your house to live in adherence with a certain set of rules and practices that will lead to the outcomes that you want in your life, if you're looking for that divinity, that divine expression, that Christed path, that Buddhic path, whatever it is for you, then of course it's not going to make sense for you. You have soul. You're soulless, but not permanently. So only when, in the creative and evolutionary process, the evolutionary process is the process of awakening and consciousness. Again, as Bailey says, these two are brought into conjunction and fusion. They need to merge, fusion. Then you have the opportunity to manifest as a trinity. A trinity is that monad, that father, mother, son energy, will, thought, and feeling, where I'm consciously master of my fate, right? They say, captain of my ship, master of my soul, master of my fate. It's like all these different things that you hear start to make sense, that this is what it's all about. It's making these intentional choices of who to be, how to express all of this stuff, rather than the previous way of mimicking, wandering, being aimless and fruitless. That's all it's about. It's an intentional way of being, versus an aimless way of being. And it's non-judgment of either path. It's just a choice of a different thing that's on the buffet menu. But people can see that in the aimless path, there tends to be more suffering and more struggle, which is why all your gurus, the path of the Christian faith or the path of the Buddha was, to understand suffering. Why do people suffer? Because they do all of this. They consume all these things that they shouldn't be consuming. They think in all these ways that they shouldn't be thinking. They're around all of these things that they shouldn't be in. And that's where you get the rules of the dogma that say, abstain from this, abstain from that. And that's the way. That's the way. But Theosophy has said that we've looked at these different people doing this in their own different ways. And here's what they're actually saying. Get to the cause. This is the philosopher. Get to the cause. How did they get that result? How did Buddha get his results? How did Christ get their results? How did so-and-so get their results? They got the Lamborghini and whatever. And then we'll put all that together and we'll create a path for other people who want to walk it spiritually and non-dogmatically. And each of those people arrive at soul consciousness in terms of this teaching. All of them, except for the person who doesn't choose the path of discipleship. But what it says is, as all that we shall posit in this treatise is to be approached from the angle of the human evolution, it might be stated that only when the soul aspect is dominant is the response apparatus, the form nature of man, fulfilling its complete destiny. So, since we're talking about human evolution, it might be stated that only when the soul is dominant is the person, the form, fulfilling their complete destiny. So she takes it a step further. What is my destiny? What is my purpose? All that stuff. If you haven't even started to figure out what your soul is, make that dominant, then this teaching says you haven't began the path of fulfilling your destiny. And some people don't care about that. Some people don't want it, whatever. But the people who are called to it are the people who step on the path of discipleship, who do the stuff, who read the teachings and do the things. And this is where they get that sense of fulfillment and purpose and all of that stuff. When they walk a path of faith, whatever that may be, or when they choose a spiritual path and they do these, learn these things, it's because it feels like a fulfillment of their destiny in whichever way that is. But that's because consciousness and soul attainment is ultimately what each and every man is supposed to be evolving towards, because it gives them that sense of freedom, that sense of God head in the monad, that sense of creative power, that sense of consciousness, awareness of your environment, connection to all things, moving freely, moving fully, moving happily. That's when you are fulfilled in your destiny. And it's saying that you can choose to do it however you choose to do it, but only when you start to activate the path. I hope that makes sense. It's difficult to grasp beneath that rank because you haven't started. See, it's kind of simple. And only then does true magnetic radiation and the pure shining forth of the light become possible. Finishing up this last section here. Symbolically, in the early stages of human evolution, man is, from the angle of consciousness, relatively unresponsive and unconscious, as is matter in its early stages in the formative process. Consider a rock. Unconscious, right? But a rock has a life too. But it says earlier on, we're speaking in this treatise from the human angle of evolution, and our evolution is an evolution of consciousness. So when we begin our process of evolution, we are relatively unresponsive to our soul nature, and we are unconscious. We don't know anything about this stuff, and that's normal. But as the achievement of full awareness is, of course, the goal of the evolutionary process. Again, symbolically speaking, the unevolved man emits or manifests no light. The light in the head is invisible. Though the clairvoyant investigators would see the dim glow of the light within the elements, which constitute the body, and the light hidden in the atoms, which constitute the form nature. This is just funny because it makes me think back to that clip of They Live, where it says that, the unevolved person has no light, but the clairvoyant can see a dim light, or in terms of just being able to see something different. So he puts on his glasses and he can see two people in front of him. One looks essentially like a monster. The other one looks like just an average normal person. The difference there, if we're going to take this material and look at it in terms of what that movie is saying, is this person is on the path. So they look, and their form is pure, it is clean, It is a reflection of who they are on the inside, as within, so without. This other person who might be possessed by a different energy that is still not soul, and it is not self. It is of a lower nature, and it is emitting its looks in a certain way. And we see that in society too. A lot of people that they have the dark circles, they look haggard, they look really kind of like, oof, who are they worshiping? What energy are they worshiping? If it's like the drugs, right, or the alcohol, these things kind of have their way of outpicturing on the physical body in a certain way if they are abused, you know. I'm not going to say I don't enjoy a glass of wine, but it's all about balance, and it's all about your walk and your faith. And if it allows for that, then sure, within reason. But when he puts on his glasses, he can see the level of soul that is present in this person or the next. We are not all the same. And so a person who sells their soul, when we talk about a lot of it in Hollywood and things like that, that means that what they are selling or what they're getting rid of is their consciousness. They're losing their awareness of their environment. They are surrendering their home, their temple, to whatever toxicities they're permitting inside of them in exchange for their soul, which is their light, their wisdom, the truth of who they are. They've sold their soul. It's not like a transaction with money. It's a contract that they've made mentally, spiritually, to hand over their vessel to be possessed by someone else to control it. Talked about handlers in a previous video. We talked about all that stuff that can be done in a mega way and in a micro way. But when someone sells their soul, and that last clip also, they live when he was like, oh, I want to see what the money says. What does the money say? It says, oh, this is your God. If someone sells their soul, also in Hollywood, they talk about, oh, they want money. If money becomes your God, or you're willing to do all these other reckless, heinous things, again, you are devoid of the soul. You are not possessing your temple. You are not choosing to be who you are, because who you are is more than that and does not do those things. So that's what it means, right? So when a person says, oh, that person is soulless or they're heartless, you know, it kind of makes a little bit more sense, maybe, hopefully. But at the end of the day, it's not like a permanent thing. It's not like a permanent transaction. Of course, the more you allow yourself to be possessed by certain things, like as hard drugs, you know, it does become a lot harder to get back to yourself, to get clean, right? So in that way, if you sell your soul to these practices that are not on the path of discipleship, it could take a lot longer to take back possession of yourself, to get your temple clean, to then allow your signal to beam out for the soul to come in. You know, it's always there. This talks about it like there's like a spark, and it's like it needs to be fanned, and you fan it with every step that you take along the path. And like, oh, who am I? What is my birth chart? Like, what is my personality traits? What would I be good at? Maybe I shouldn't just try to get this thing just because they have it. Maybe there is enough for everyone. Maybe I can help the person next to me, and maybe I should stop competing. Maybe we can work like that. Those kinds of things are fanning a flame within you that becomes a light that emits, that says that I have embodied my being and my soul and my practice of moving along the path. That's all it means. That's all it is. But it's also great. It's a beautiful thing. So I hope that helps. This is going to be super long, I know, but I hope it's been useful. And I will see you in the next one. Take care.
White rabbit.